Matt, we're continuing on with Fight Night Picks Parry and Counter. This is the bracket week in MMA, and now we're moving to lightweight. One of the deepest divisions in MMA across the sport. I mean, realistically, you look at this bracket, and listen, a couple of things to note. If you've been following along this week, maybe you missed it from 125 up to 145. Those are already out. Thank you for checking out lightweight. But the way that this is working, this is like a work of a madman, because what we're doing in this tournament is this is a one-night thing. These are all championship fights. 5-minute rounds. You accumulate that damage, you bring that damage with you, and you continue on in the tournament. Matt, really interesting because, again, fighters that aren't currently in the UFC. I mean, we've got Benson Henderson, Timofey Nastyukhin. Who else do we have? Tofiq Musayev, Eddie Alvarez, Natan, Schulte. We've got some fighters that are outside of the promotion, and it's interesting in that regard. Now, in terms of this round of 16, what's maybe one of the fights that really steps out and I don't know, it's jumping out at you?
Jumping out at me? Well, Conor McGregor versus Justin Gaethje. It's been rumored for so long now. Just give us that fight. And it's a compelling matchup because you've got a guy who's very much kind of like a sniper or a surgeon, very clean in the way he works. Conor McGregor, he throws just perfect power and accurate shots, versus Justin Gaethje, who brings in just a whirligig of violence, and that's the best way I can describe him. Even if you beat Justin Gaethje, you're not going to be the same person afterwards. It's not an easy fight, so that's the one that stands out the most to me. What one are you looking at?
I mean, to me, again, all sorts of great matchups. Charles Oliveira, excuse me, Dustin Poirier, that's a fun one. I mean, that's one of those ones where, well, we get to see it in the coming future. I mean, you know, with Charles Oliveira able to extend that win streak into the top 15, beating a guy like Kevin Lee the way he was able to get a win there, will he end up with a guy like Dustin Poirier in the future? Maybe not near future, but in the future. An interesting one there. I mean, a guy that's broken into the top 15 versus a guy that's been interim champion and at the top for a fair bit of time, and was also able to do it at 145. And also, interestingly enough, Charles Oliveira has experience there as well. So that's one of those ones that jumps out to me. But if we start top to bottom, I mean, typically in every single one of these rounds, in every single one of these weight classes, we did leave our champion as the number one, and maybe not champion per se, just the fact that they're the UFC champion, but the number one lightweight in the world right now. And we're talking about not just the number one lightweight in the world right now, but possibly, is this guy the best lightweight that there's ever been?
That's true.
Khabib Nurmagomedov taking on Timofey Nastyukhin. A lot of people are going to be familiar with Nastyukhin's last fight, and it's been some time, was Eddie Alvarez when he finished him and welcomed him to one championship. That's going to be tough, though, when we've seen power punchers come and go and face Khabib Nurmagomedov, and they weren't able to beat him. This guy's still 28-0.
I think this is as much of a buy as a first round as we've ever had on this new tournament series that we've created. Khabib's going to win this fight. He's going to win it pretty easily, and that's my in-depth analysis.
Yeah, I mean, Khabib in that one, you definitely have to favor him. I mean, out of anybody else in this, matchup, I think even Eddie Alvarez, and yeah, he got caught in that fight against Nastyukhin and finished, but I think he'd probably have better odds to beat Khabib. But still, decent fight nonetheless, Khabib. All right, now we get a little bit of controversy. So let's say Iaquinta taking on Edson Barboza. And again, that's where it gets interesting, because with Barboza, he's making the move. He's committed to going down to 45, but traditionally he's been at 55, and I would still consider him as one of the better lightweights out there in the world. So in a fight against Iaquinta, I mean, what's your take there?
So I think the speed advantage of Barboza would be absolutely deadly in this fight. This fight to me would be like Barboza versus Dan Hooker, but times 100 and a lot quicker. I think, at least, because Iaquinta, really good wrestler, really good boxer, but those are the two primary tools he brings into the cage, and he's not so good of a wrestler that he really looks for takedowns in his fights. He'll go for them if he can get them, but it's more of, okay, I'm going to strike with you, and then I'll decide to take you down. You can't really decide to strike with Edson Barboza unless you're a guy on the level of like a Paul Felder or a Tony Ferguson on the feet. And although I do think Iaquinta is a very good fighter, I just don't see him as that upper tier of a lightweight.
And when you look at it too, I mean, with Iaquinta taking on Edson Barboza, and it's funny, like, I mean, he has challenged for a title before. Yes. Iaquinta has, which is something that Barboza can't say at 155.
That's true.
It's interesting here because with Iaquinta, for him to have a lot of success, it's got to be kind of a dogfight. He's got to be really in close and in range. And in a fight against Edson Barboza, I just don't know if he'd be able to get that. Exactly. And you talked about some people that have found success against Barboza, getting in close, like a Paul Felder what have you. I just don't see that in this fight for Al.
Exactly. It's not that Al's bad. It's just I don't have him. He's the last guy I have who I don't let in my top tier of the lightweights gate. Like, I think Al's really good, and he gives a lot of guys in that kind of section of the division, the top 5, hard fights. I just don't ever think he beats those guys in the top 5 or 6 of the division. And honestly, I still think Barboza's there. He only loses to guys who are also in that sort of realm, so I think Barboza would end up with TKO in this.
Next fight, Charles Oliveira taking on Dustin Poirier. Again, another really interesting one, and we haven't seen Dustin Poirier since UFC 242 when he fought Khabib for the title to unify the belts. Now he's taking on Charles Oliveira in this, which is interesting again because Charles Oliveira, a 7-fight win streak. He's been finishing fights. He's looked great. And then they throw him one of the better guys in the lightweight division, and he finishes him too. So Charles Oliveira on a great run. Dustin Poirier, good run, but I mean a skid, I guess you can even consider it that. Lost to Khabib, one of the greatest of all time. It's an interesting fight. It really is.
It really is, but again, I have the same problem with Charles Oliveira that I do with a lot of guys who just have really good jiu-jitsu and the wrestling's okay. How did that fight get to the ground against Kevin Lee? He needed Kevin Lee to initiate the grappling for the fight to ever go to the ground. He tried to take Kevin Lee down once, maybe twice in that fight, but wasn't able to do it. But Kevin Lee, being the really good wrestler he is, had to make the fight go to the floor for him to have success. The problem is, every time he brought it to the floor, he just did what Oliveira wanted him to do. Dustin Poirier wouldn't shoot for takedowns in this fight. His striking's good enough that, although Oliveira actually has come a really long way in his striking, I don't think Oliveira is a good enough striker to hurt Poirier enough to drop him and then try to take him out with a submission. And on the feet, Poirier's second to none in this division. I just think the power would eventually get Charles Oliveira, especially over a 5-round fight, and Poirier would end up knocking him out.
That's that big striking test that we're going to probably all want to see for Charles Oliveira. Exactly. I mean, before it was, can he handle the wrestling? Well, yeah, he passed that test with flying colors. So now we get to see how he would make out with a guy that's, again, another big step up in competition and has that great striking ability. I just don't think he'd be able to get the win over Dustin Poirier here. I would agree with you there, which makes the next fight all the more interesting. Diego Ferreira, another guy that's on the rise, kind of like Charles Oliveira, and it was a question that we answered not that long ago with Parry Counter. Do these guys make sense? Because if you look over on FightMatrix.com, you've got Diego Ferreira and Charles Oliveira ranked near the top of the division. They're in the top 10. So Diego Ferreira taking on Benson Henderson, who, again, if you're talking in terms of lightweight GOAT, Benson Henderson has to be in that conversation.
No, he does not.
3 title defenses or 3 title fights.
Edgar.
It doesn't matter. Benson Henderson is one of the best lightweights of all time. It is the truth. Maybe not in 2020 though, and that's where it gets interesting because if Benson Henderson, Diego Ferreira, if it's a 5-round fight, Benson Henderson's had a lot of 5-round fights. He's got great cardio. He's got great volume. He's got good defensive wrestling. Like, what would be the path for Diego Ferreira to beat such a well-rounded veteran like that?
All you have to do is have volume. I don't think Benson Henderson at this stage of his career is that much special. I think he's a good guy at not getting finished. I think he's a really good defensive fighter. But this fight's probably going to be by far your most boring in this first round. Now, again, the other matchups in this first round have been Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, and we'll get to Paul Felder and Tony Ferguson. Like, they're exceptional matchups, don't get me wrong. But Diego Ferreira he's kind of like Ian Heinisch, just in the way that he never looks tired, but he never looks like he's at 100% cardio-wise. He just always kind of keeps that same pace throughout the fight. I understand the skills that they employ are a little bit differently, but just from that perspective of they're always just kind of moving forward constantly, and they're going to keep that pressure throughout the fight. Benson Henderson's going to throw front kicks. He's going to move out of the way. He's going to go for the occasional takedown. He's going to do enough to win the fight, but he's never going to do enough that you're definitely going to think he won that fight. That's why Benson Henderson, when you look at his record, we talk about this all the time, Benson Henderson could probably beat Khabib by split decision and lose to Miles Jury by split decision. It's just kind of the way that Benson Henderson fights. There's nothing against him. He's had a crazy amount of success. It's just not the most fan-friendly style to compete under. But with Diego Ferreira, that's the problem. There's ways to beat Benson Henderson. For instance, in the next matchup, he'll fight Dustin Poirier. If you're a guy like Poirier who's that much better of a striker than Benson Henderson, you'll be able to beat him that way. But if you're a guy who's just kind of good at everything and your real key is your jiu-jitsu, I don't see you being able to take down Benson Henderson at any point during the fight. So I agree. Henderson would win a fight. It would go all 5 rounds, though, and neither guy would take much damage.
Interesting matchup, nonetheless.
Fight Night Picks is brought to you by Strikeforce Energy. Head on over to the website, strikeforceenergy.com. If you enjoy the flavor of freedom, the company's veteran-owned, and everything's made in America. They've got great apparel. You can turn any 16.9-ounce beverage into an energy drink. There's no sugar, no calories, no stirring, or no shaking required. They also have a line of different products as well as Strikeforce Coffee. So if I head into my cart, I've got a 4-count sample pack. I've got a 20-ounce coffee mug. And if I head into that checkout, use the promo code FNP, Click to apply, and you're going to save 20% off any order. That's FNP at StrikeforceEnergy.com.
The next one, Paul Felder, Tony Ferguson. It's one that, okay, so Tony Ferguson's booked to fight for the title against Khabib. Paul Felder just had a crazy fight against Dan Hooker. And yeah, he came out on the losing end there. Let's go back to his last fight. A crazy fight against Edson Barboza. Like, it's hard to not have a crazy Paul Felder fight. It's pretty hard not to have a crazy Tony Ferguson fight, too.
I can guarantee you one of not many things. Someone's going to bleed in that fight, though. Both guys get cut open very easily, and both guys are very good at cutting open other people. Paul Felder and Tony Ferguson are also kind of in the same stage of their career where I feel like they're closer to the 18th hole than they are to the first. They're definitely on the back nine. Paul Felder openly, well, after his last fight, contemplated retirement, but then, of course, it's come out and said that he's not going to retire after all. And Tony Ferguson, 36. That's why if the Khabib and Tony fight doesn't go through, like, now, I don't know if we're ever going to see 100% Tony Ferguson fight 100% Khabib. It's really unfortunate to say because that doesn't just decide who's the best, right now. It's really who's the GOAT of the lightweight division. And I think Tony wins that, though. Unless Paul Felder can knock out Tony Ferguson, and it's not impossible, it's just people have had a very hard time doing it in the past, you're not going to beat Tony.
And this is the thing that a lot of people carry with Paul Felder. It's the fact that he's such a great striker, which is true, but also he's good at all aspects of MMA.
Okay, he's not good at getting back up to his feet. That's the one thing he's not great at. That's why I always thought the Khabib fight would be tough for Paul Felder if he did get it in UFC 223 instead of Iaquinta, but Paul Felder is going to be able to do really well against those upper echelon guys. Again, I put him kind of in that Iaquinta boat. He can have those fight of the nights. He can have those really good performances against the top tier of lightweights. I just don't know really how many of them he beats. I think he could beat Dan Hooker if they had a rematch, but that would be about it. I don't see him beating, the Poiriers, the Fergusons, the McGregors, the Khabib, so on. So I think that would be a very fun fight. That could be probably one of the most exciting of that round, but I think Ferguson wins.
So going with Ferguson to advance in this stage of it. And then you've got Tofiq Musayev taking on Eddie Alvarez. And the thing that's interesting about this, Musayev's looked great lately. Eddie Alvarez hasn't looked all that great lately. Well, so you have to kind of wonder, are you going to get Eddie Alvarez from 2011, 2012 in Bellator when he was just lighting the world on fire? Are you getting Eddie Alvarez who fought RDA and was lighting the world on fire and became UFC lightweight champ? Or are we going to get Eddie Alvarez that hopped in there against Tim Nasty and got lit up himself?
Well, good news. Every version of those Eddie Alvarez wins this fight. It's very clear cut that way. Tofiq is good. He just doesn't have anything that would really give Eddie Alvarez that much of a problem because Eddie Alvarez, you really have to understand, we're talking about a historically great lightweight and a guy who's fought pretty much everyone else on this list. So it takes a special kind of athlete to be able to beat Eddie Alvarez. So I don't think Tofiq is that.
So we'll go with Eddie Alvarez there. Now we move into a fight, and you're talking about it. Two guys that Eddie Alvarez has fought before in Conor McGregor and Justin Gaethje, a fight that's been rumored. Will it happen? Who knows? Is that the fight to make it 155 for Conor McGregor? I think it is, more than just a title fight against Khabib or the winner of Khabib and Tony, if we even get that. But Conor McGregor, Justin Gaethje is an interesting fight, and you brought it up to start because you got a guy who's such a technical striker in Conor McGregor that picks his shots, but he's able to hit them. Justin Gaethje is like a whirling dervish of wildness in a cage. And he'll do whatever he needs to do to inflict damage. He'll throw a rolling thunder if he needs to. He'll pick you up and slam you if he needs to.
Really, anything.
We don't see that as much lately. But Justin Gaethje, Conor McGregor is such an interesting stylistic fight because, yeah, two primary strikers, but they do it in such a different way that's what makes it fun.
So another comparison, do you think you'd be able, if you're a really good dart player, it's easy to hit the bullseye, okay? Conor McGregor's like that. He's just really good. He can hit the shots he wants to hit when he wants to hit them. Justin Gaethje's like taking 100 darts in your hand, though, and just throwing them all at the dartboard, because one's going to hit the bullseye. That's the difference between the two. One guy, it's all that volume that you have to deal with, against the other guy who, that's the thing, it's almost scarier because you don't have to deal with the volume. It's not like, okay, these shots are coming at me, I can move out of the way. It's, okay, the first shot he throws is going to have big power on it. It's going to stay like that for a while. That's not what's so hard to beat Conor McGregor. So I think Justin Gaethje would have his moments in this fight. I do think he would make it that crazy, chaotic kind of Justin Gaethje fight that we always see. But eventually, technique beats that kind of chaos, and eventually I think McGregor would be able to beat Gaethje.
The thing with Justin Gaethje that it seems to be every UFC fight. I don't know if it was the same way in World Series of Fighting, but in the UFC it's always been, this guy's such a high-level wrestler. He's got that in his back pocket. and he never uses it. Geez, I hope next fight he uses it.
No,
well, that's starting to run out. Like, he just doesn't use it, and he probably that's it. He probably won't use it. And I talked about it, the slam knockouts. If you go way back and start watching Justin Gaethje's amateur fights, and even his first, and it's only his first couple of pro fights, that's when he would use his wrestling to set everything up. He doesn't use it like at all.
He doesn't, but here's one good thing. Gaethje has kind of completely changed the way he's fought the last 3 fights. So I don't think he can't make those improvements. I just don't think... I think at this stage in his career, he's found out the formula that helps Justin Gaethje win the most. And in his last 3 fights, I know it's against James Vick, Edson Barboza, and Cowboy. Say what you want about the level of competition. At least at the time, each and every one of those opponents were thought very highly of. And Justin Gaethje was able to knock them all out in the first round. Why, though? Not because he went in there and just, put my hands up, throw leg kicks, and eventually I'm going to knock them out. It was... what if I have that crazy power, but I don't need to throw every shot that I know every minute of every fight? Like, what if we actually slow down a little bit and I try to become a little bit more of the technician? So for Justin Gaethje, I think he can go to that sort of crazy, chaotic fight that he has to have, but I think when he really needs to, he can be that sort of, calm Chris Striker. Both those versions don't beat Conor, unfortunately.
No, and I mean, you could liken it to your darts reference and say that maybe he's just not going for the bullseye. Maybe he's going for the full 180.
There you go. That's exactly what it is.
All right, last fight in the bracket. You've got the 2-time PFL champ in Natan Schulte taking on Dan Hooker. It's an interesting fight, it is, but Natan Schulte in the UFC... I mean, he's not in the UFC anymore. Run. It's not in the that's one thing. I mean, yeah, he's looked good in PFL. It's just the PFL's lightweight bracket or division isn't anywhere near the level of competition that Dan Hooker's been facing in the past. And Dan Hooker's fought wrestlers, and Dan Hooker's beat wrestlers. Yeah. And in this fight, I mean, it's pretty well as clear cut as any of these fights.
So Dan Hooker, just if anyone forgot, in his second last win against Iaquinta, who I think everyone can agree, Iaquinta is a really good fighter. He pitched a complete shutout, beat the brakes off him everywhere as the fight went. He landed that really good low calf kick. Worked out really well for us. So Dan Hooker, he's the last guy I let in, if you will, for who's into my elite of the lightweights in the UFC, at least for the time being. So I do think that highly of Dan Hooker. I think that he's going to keep on going towards that title. So yes, Dan Hooker beats Natan Schulte.
So our next round, we have Khabib versus Barboza. We have Poirier versus Henderson. We have Tony Ferguson, Eddie Alvarez, Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker. You have former champion Eddie Alvarez, interim champion Tony Ferguson, former champion, interim champion, and then the top champ. A lot of champs here. If we go bottom to top, Dan Hooker and Justin Gaethje, that's another really fun fight. And 2 guys that have very fan-friendly type of styles, performance bonus type of styles. What do you see in that one?
Justin Gaethje kicks his leg off and knocks him out. If Justin Gaethje's beating Conor McGregor earlier in the night, that means he's going to beat Dan Hooker later on in the night, because not a single person on planet Earth who might, well, unless they're like Dan Hooker's family, is going to say Dan Hooker is better than Conor McGregor. Say what you will about McGregor, outside the cage, but his inside, like his actual fights, if you just go by those, he's still one of the top guys in the world. Gaethje against Hooker is interesting, though, because Hooker is another one of these guys, very good technically. He does everything by the book, and Gaethje, of course, brings all that madness into the cage with him. I think the madness would win out in this fight, just because Dan Hooker's been hurt in fights. We see Edson Barboza was able to rock him. Paul Felder on numerous occasions was able to rock him. And I don't think Justin Gaethje is a less powerful puncher than either one of those guys. So I think that Gaethje would eventually go for the knockout.
It'd be really interesting, too, to see Justin Gaethje, if it were to happen, in any sort of precarious position in terms of the grappling and the jiu-jitsu of Dan Hooker, because you'd have to think, I mean, he would win out in that aspect of his game, just in that aspect of his game, that he would have better jiu-jitsu and he'd be able to at least get himself into a good position if it was to get onto the feet. But I say that, it probably wouldn't happen whatsoever. I mean, you see in any Justin Gaethje fight, no matter who it's against, it's an absolute brawl. And against Dan Hooker, who likes to brawl, you're going to get a brawl. So yeah, I would think that Justin Gaethje would win out in that one. An interesting fight nonetheless. Eddie Alvarez, Tony Ferguson, again, former champ, interim champ. What a fun fight. It's a fun fight.
I think this is a fun fight, but this fight only goes one way. I think Ferguson finishes Alvarez. I think when Alvarez was still in the UFC, and not to say he's dropped off that much, but let's just take prime Eddie Alvarez against prime Tony Ferguson. I think Ferguson still wins. He's got a really hard style if you're Eddie Alvarez to deal with, because Eddie Alvarez, against guys who are throwing a lot of volume at him, he's going to he's going to box up and then he's going to go throw his big shots. And we saw that against Justin Gaethje, for instance. Now, the body work was something he was able to do against Gaethje, which was really able to kind of combat all of that volume going towards him. But I think against Ferguson, he's going to be cut, he's going to be exhausted, and he's going to be one of the few guys who Alvarez doesn't have a cardio advantage over. And so by the end of 5 rounds, Ferguson would definitely be able to find out what takes to win.
And Eddie Alvarez, maybe not surprising if you're a big Eddie Alvarez fan, but one of the things with him, and you mentioned it, he's a guy that's actually pretty good on his back foot, and if he gets backed up and somebody pressures him, he's able to at least, with his head movement, start to counter. He's a very, very good inside boxer that way.
The issue, though, is can you do that against Tony, and can you do that for 25 minutes? Because if you're going to find yourself in that position for at least 1 minute of the fight, you're probably going to find yourself in that position for multiple minutes of the fight, and we've seen what Tony does to guys against the cage. Anthony Pettis.
My big example, that's what I was going to say, would be Anthony Pettis. And yeah, Pettis had some moments, he did, but then his hand broke on him. Now,
if your hope, though, again, if your hope is to knock out Tony Ferguson, you're going to lose the fight. If that's your only method to beat him, you can't beat him, because I know he's been dropped, and people think that he doesn't have a great chin because he gets dropped in a lot of his fights. No. That shows that you have a good chin, if anything. Because Tony Ferguson can get hit by a sledgehammer, he gets back up. And that's what I care a lot more about than just if you can go down or not. Is people who get back up are really special. So Tony Ferguson fits that mold.
So your next fight, we're talking about a former champion that's just hard to have a good fight against him, Benson Henderson against Dustin Poirier. And again,
a boring fight against him.
Yeah, that's true. And it's weird because maybe similar, not similar in certain circumstances, but with Dustin Poirier, a definite power advantage at this point in his career against the Benson Henderson that, yeah, you're right. I mean, he could fight Khabib, he could win that fight, he could fight Miles Jury, and he could possibly lose it. You never know what you're going to get with Benson Henderson. But in saying that, you're going to get some measure of consistency.
Exactly. The thing you're going to get in this fight is you're going to get, if you're a Poirier fan, about 15 minutes of, this is really boring, and I don't think he's winning the rounds. And then it's going to get to a certain point where he's going to start landing, and he's not going to stop landing from that point on. If you can rock Max Holloway and keep him hurt, if you can hurt guys like Justin Gaethje and Eddie Alvarez and finish them, you're going to be able to finish a guy like Benson Henderson. I know. And that's the weird thing, too. Like, Benson will probably win more rounds at a certain point, and you're going to think, like, he's won quite a few minutes of this fight, but he's not going to do a lot in each of those rounds. He's going to do, it'll be like, I think Henderson won that round. I think he won the second. He's actually winning the third, and then Poirier lands something big, and that'll probably change the outcome. So I think Poirier wins, and probably by stoppage in this one, but it'd be a nice fight to see.
Yeah, it's an interesting fight, and it's one of those things that, you always wonder about if Benson Henderson stuck around with the UFC. I mean, we saw what happened with Gilbert Melendez, but if Benson Henderson stuck around for a little bit longer, maybe something would have been a little bit different. And then if you go to the top of the bracket, Edson Barboza, Khabib, we've already had that fight, and I think it would be a continuation of that fight. I don't see much.
You feel so bad if you're Edson Barboza, like, looking forward in this bracket, just being like,
that's why he's going down to 145.
I could beat a lot of these guys, but I have to fight my kryptonite round
So, Ferguson, Gaethje, Poirier, Nurmagomedov, well, let's go to the top. We saw that fight.
We did.
And I think it would be more of the same again. I think maybe there's a way that Dustin Poirier can win that fight. You seem to think of some.
You're talking to Dustin Poirier's biggest fan in the world, and I think he did really well in that fight. I think he did better than anyone as of late has done against Khabib, even Conor. Just because Poirier had two moments you can actually think back of it, you can think, okay, Khabib was in some sort of danger. He had him rocked in the second round right at the beginning, and then he almost got him in that guillotine too. So there's two really good things to draw from. Here's the problem, though. We're talking about 2 moments in a pretty long fight that one of the best fighters in the world had success in. That's just how good Khabib is.
And we talked about all the wins that Dustin Poirier's had recently. The Gaethjes, the Alvarez, against strikers. And then he faces Khabib. He has 2 good moments, and then after the fight, considers retiring.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
Hasn't fought since.
Have you ever heard the audio in between their first and second round? Just in between the first and second round, it goes on Twitter every now and then. Mike Brown's like, "How are you?" And Dustin Poirier goes, "I can't keep this MFer off me." And that's just the perfect way to describe what Khabib does to people. There's never any separation to get off a big knockout shot, because you need distance if you're a really good striker. Khabib doesn't give you that distance. Very hard to knock a guy out when you're chest to chest with him. And for that reason, Khabib beats Poirier.
And that's another interesting thing, too. And this is one of those things that we've gotten lately in talking about Khabib. A lot of people are trying to nitpick ways that somebody will win or Tony Ferguson will win. It happens every fight. And right now, the narrative in the story is, well, go back and watch the fight against Gleison Tibau. And I know, first last, I'm sure you're watching this. You threw it down in the comments that Gleison Tibau won that fight. You and I believe 6 of 7 people that voted on MMA decisions back when that fight happened, and Joe Rogan and Mike Goldberg thought that Gleison Tibau won that fight. I went back and watched that fight. And yeah, one guy's a champ right now and the other guy's not in the organization. But I honestly didn't see how Gleison Tebow won that fight.
It was close.
It was close.
Yes, and that's the problem. Everyone's trying to judge Khabib on this big gradient. How if anyone does anything positive against him, it gets blown out of proportion. Forget about the Tebow fight just because it was so long ago. These fighters aren't even the same people at this point. So, yeah, it's not a great argument to bring up when you think Khabib can be beat, that he might have lost to a guy in the pre-USADA era who was known for dabbling in such, dark arts.
And that was the other thing, too, was the fact that people would say, oh, Gleison got him or this and that and whatever. Okay. We're looking at this fight and the Gleison fight. Dustin Poirier needs that distance. You look at the way that Khabib fought Gleison Tebow, it was really hard for Tebow to get distance in that fight. Even when he was successful, it had to have been in close.
We're talking about Gleison Tebow, though. Like, at the time, he was a prime Dustin Poirier.
And when you're in close against Khabib right now in 2012, you can't do anything. It's suffocating, like you said.
I don't think there's a person disagreeing. I'd go as far to say if Gleison Tebow rematched Khabib this year, Khabib would probably beat him. Back to you, Craig.
I think you're right. Tony Ferguson, Justin Gaethje, our bottom bracket fight in a round of 4. Again, Justin Gaethje has had an all-violence bracket so far against Conor McGregor and Dan Hooker, and Tony Ferguson has equally had an all-violence bracket against Paul Felder and Eddie Alvarez. So for the crown of all violence at lightweight, we have Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje, which is a fight that could be a flip of a coin at this point.
It could be.
It's a fun fight. It really is.
Stylistically, it's an awful one for Tony Ferguson, but I still think he wins. Let me explain. Tony Ferguson's phenomenal off his back, and everyone wants to bring that up about, how good his jiu-jitsu is. We need to stop doing that, too. Tony Ferguson's only ever finished one person off his back in the UFC, and it was Kevin Lee. There's not a lot of examples we can draw to where it's like, don't worry. If Khabib takes down Tony Ferguson, it doesn't matter, because Tony Ferguson's so good from his guard. No, he's really good from his guard, but there's limits to what even, the best people who try to utilize their guard can do. And Justin Gaethje's not going to let him get in that position in the first place. Like you said, it's been a while since he's used wrestling in his fights. And if it is kind of the more subdued version of Justin Gaethje, which I understand is still quite the reckless fighter, it's going to be hard for Tony Ferguson to A, catch a neck in scrambles, or B, try to take down Justin Gaethje. Good news for Ferguson, though. You can beat Justin Gaethje. You have to be able to match his output or his power. All you have to do is match one of those two. Eddie Alvarez was able to do it. He went to the body a lot, and he made sure that by the third round, that power bar of Gaethje was starting to deplete, and then he was able to finish him. Dustin Poirier just kind of was able to outbox him throughout the fight. There was one big thing you could pull from. Tony Ferguson would be able to at least withstand that big storm that Gaethje brings, and then from then on kind of pick him apart.
Yeah, and as long as Tony Ferguson can switch it up like he typically does, try and at least get out of the way of some of those leg kicks, I think he 100%. Would find success as well. That's why I would take him there. And also, we're talking about the crown of all violence. Maybe you get the crown, but by the time you face those fighters to get here, you're not going to get 100% Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje.
Both these guys are probably missing an arm by this time. Eyes have been swollen, teeth have been lost. These guys don't fight. These guys don't have styles that would indicate that they're going to fight 4 times in one night for 25 minutes apiece. So this would be a whole day bracket now that I'm thinking of it, just to keep it all in the same time. But Tony would win. It would be an extremely fun fight. It would be one for the fans without a doubt. We would probably be able to sell at least 5 million pay-per-views if the UFC let us put this tournament together for one day. So I think Ferguson wins, but that's a very hard fight.
Yeah, I mean, just sign back Benson Henderson, Tofiq Musayev, Natan, Schulte, Tim Nasty,
and
we're
at least in business.
Yeah, we're golden. Now into the finals, of course, as you guessed it, you get your main event for UFC 249. If you want a full prediction, the full 5 minutes, you're gonna have to wait until the fight's actually booked and might actually happen.
You might get Gaethje versus Ferguson first, for all we know.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with Fight Night picks. But if we're Fight Night picking this main event between Khabib and Tony Ferguson, okay,
Khabib had one hard fight, maybe.
Yeah, that's the thing. And, on a good day, I'm taking Khabib to win this fight over Tony Ferguson. If you're asking me, way out from UFC 249 who's going to win, in the back of my mind and in my mouth and on the tip of my tongue is Khabib, all day, easily.
Oh, I don't think easily. I think you need to calm down a little bit. But, I agree. At 100%, I would still think Khabib's going to win. I'm probably going to end up picking Ferguson. I'll change my mind by the time we do a real video if these two ever do fight. But yes, at 100%, if you're going to make the argument that Khabib's going to win, I can't really say no. Here's the thing. At what would probably be about a 4% Tony Ferguson versus a 90% Khabib, I'm pretty sure Nurmagomedov would win.
I mean, in this circumstance, Eddie Bravo has Tony Ferguson
hoisted up Weekend at Bernie's, and they're just pretending so we can get that title shot.
It's what was it? WrestleMania, was it WrestleMania 4 when it was Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan when they brought them in on the tiny rings and they were standing up? Eddie Alvarez is pushing Tony Ferguson in on a tiny cage, holding his arms up. If he can hold them up, I mean, yeah, you're not going to get 100% Tony Ferguson here to the final. So Khabib is your ultimate bracket winner.
Ultimate
and again,
defining championship.
And I think if this happened, you can shut out the GOAT conversation if there was any, because Khabib has solidified himself as the lightweight.
You know
GOAT.
what? I tell you this much. If he can beat Edson Barboza, Dustin Poirier, and Tony Ferguson all in one night, I'll agree with you, Craig.
Yeah, you know what? That's fine. And you know what? If Benson Henderson could beat all of them, you never know. He has tough fights against...
Right there with John Dodson for the greatest ever in their respective divisions.
Good guy. So that is our lightweight bracket. Make sure you check out the rest of our brackets. You're going to get welterweight on the way up through after this episode. They're coming out day by day. And if you miss 125, 35, or 45, make sure you go back and check those out. Maybe you've got good ideas for Fight Night Picks, Parry and Counter. Make sure you reach out to us at Craig Allen FNP, at Matt Allen FNP on Twitter and Instagram, or at Fight Night Picks. With your questions, let us know who you think would win this lightweight bracket. Maybe you left some names out. Exactly. And maybe that was by design. So let us know in the comments what you're thinking, who would win this whole thing. And as we always say, Matt, Fight Night Picks.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it.